Let me tell you what you're not going to hear. You won't hear me complain about the drama and fallout of the leaks leading up to this game and still dividing the fanbase. You won't hear me talk about only half of the game because of any review embargoes. And you won't hear me use extreme phrases like masterpiece to describe any game. Hi, I'm Mage, and today I'll be reviewing The Last of Us Part 2. The format of this review will be part critique, part story analysis. During the story analysis portion, spoilers will occur, so if you want to skip that part of the video, there will be a warning and a timestamp to skip to. Now, if you do want to know the entire story of the game but don't want to watch hours of gameplay or cutscenes, let me save you some time with my recap video on it, and get the whole story summary in about half an hour. Now let's begin the review. For story, the game takes place right where the first one left off. This time, gameplay and story perspective switches between chapters from the points of view of Ellie, a returning main character, and Abby, a newly introduced main character. Compared to the first game's story theme, which centered around learning love despite hardship, the sequel focuses on revenge and forgiveness despite hardship, and each character and their journey approaches that theme differently. The game paces each of its sub-chapters into distinct sections of exploration, combat, or story, seldom merging any of the two, so if you're experiencing one element, you're not likely experiencing another at the same time. Like previous titles made by developer Naughty Dog, a high level of effort was placed on the visuals and acting in this game, in an effort to make this as scripted and cinematic a game as possible. The game primarily takes place in the city of Seattle, where the streets and neighborhoods have endured years of rain, resulting in most areas either being flooded or overtaken by grass. Otherwise, the world is mostly the same, as these areas are still roamed by infected or local hostile factions. For the first half of the game, the pace of the story is up to the player, as the game presents wider areas that can slow down and be explored at a leisurely pace. By comparison, the second half of the game is a tighter experience, with more focused levels and encounters that have a quicker pace of moving the plot along. As a result, there were many points during the first half I could go for hours without seeing any advancement in the actual story, and despite banter between characters, even when the plot was moving forward, there were many times I wanted the story to advance quicker than the game wanted to, leading to many points I felt the game pace was either slow or full of repetitive filler. By comparison, the steady pacing of the second half of the game led to more enjoyable balances of gameplay and story, and some truly interesting encounters and scenarios, much more creative than most of the content in the first half. By far the most impressive effort is by the art and sound design team. From impactful blows to modifying guns to environmental ambiance, the authenticity of so many sounds adds a lot to the immersion buy-in the world is asking for. The music scoring better amplifies the mood with simple background beats, and excellent lighting and shadow work set the appropriate tone for so many scenarios. The quality of the motion capture and delivery of voice acting is excellent. There really are no weak performances here, and with character model details of such high degree, it makes the game an easy technical showpiece for the hardware it's running on. Though the frequency of using scripted doors and window entry sequences has increased to mask load times, when you see the amount of unique textures and details, sometimes only to ever be used once, you can see an attention to detail that is seldom seen in most games today. A large emphasis has been placed on animations as well, from actions in combat to crafting to face modeling, but it's noticeably inconsistent by its own fault. When they put a lot of effort into some animations and details, it makes the animations and details that are low effort or buggy stand out so much more. I noticed that for every impressive thing there is a comparable disappointing thing. You'll have nice animation of coiling rope, and then weak execution of rope swinging. You'll have a detailed process of applying a gun upgrade, but characters can either clip through the environment or just get stuck on a ladder. Some infected can have their bottom half blown off and still come crawling to you, which is really cool, and sometimes invisible hitboxes prevent clear headshots from connecting, which is really lame. I like it when the camera uses a vertigo zoom to show Abby's fear of heights, but signs and environments with really late pop-ins are lame. Ellie sketching stuff into her journal that you can reference is cool, but collectibles that glitch out when you pick them up are lame. In cutscenes, faces will be complex and emote more believably, and in normal gameplay, faces are comically simplistic and move unnaturally. Sometimes the enemy will surprise you with a flank, but usually they will just line up in single file line to die one at a time. The enemy will call out your location to others, but then promptly forget where you are. You can pet dogs, which is nice, but you can also be killed by invisible enemies, which is not nice. I think you get what I mean. With exploration, you use the wider areas to progress from one story point to the next, with tools such as jumping, crawling, swimming, and rope throwing added to your toolkit. Panes of glass can be shattered to reveal a health or resource collectible behind them, to open a new path, or act as a distraction for enemies. Curiously, jumping is in itself very poor. Not only does it look ridiculous, but it does not offer as much freedom with the environment as you would expect. There are now more vertical options, creating some interesting level layouts, but all this is doing is adding a more natural option to traversing instead of having to find a convenient plank or cross a ladder to climb. Climbing up or over things isn't new, it's just being made more convenient than how the first game handled it, and so it's simply being used more often. This also does not add any more freedom to explore, as there are environments and obstacles you feel you should be able to simply hop to or over, but the game specifically disables the option to jump in those spots or puts up unnatural invisible walls. I would think that if we're going to go with contextual jumping, then something like auto-jumping over gaps or limited parkour should have been implemented instead of giving you a jump button that you cannot always use. Still, though progression is linear, obstacles in your way will require more observation of the environment, as something nearby will usually need to be climbed, and it's nice to not have the solution be too obvious all the time. That being said, while you will frequently encounter times when a little environment manipulation is needed to progress, they hardly require a level of critical thinking that can be called puzzle solving, despite what the game calls them. Rather, it's more a case of learning what the environment will allow you to manipulate, since it's not always consistent or intuitive. Like in the first game, there are times the game has the character just stop and admire a view, though as scenic as those are, they really are just nice wallpaper that doesn't really add much substance. The game enjoys showing off large environments from a distance, but never actually wants to give you one, as it sticks to small areas rich in atmosphere, but low on satisfying exploration. Even for the one large zone in Seattle introduced early, outside of finding a few skill manuals that unlock skill trees and optional collectibles, there is no incentive to veering off of the main path, as players are still limited in the resources they may carry, and optional encounters will probably burn more resources than what you find, making them more trouble than they're worth. While exploring, you'll again mainly be scouring the area for resources and occasionally finding collectibles to track or safes to crack for more valuables. Playing on moderate with no options modified, I found I was never at a loss for resources to make medical kits or suppressors for my gun, so the game's efforts to maintain its survival element of limited resources and resource caps felt less impactful on my playing style. Even on harder difficulties, as most encounters can be skipped and tracking by listening is always on, the AI was not that much more of a hazard to pass. Combat is largely the same flow as the first game, being primarily stealth mixed with action, and it serves its purpose. Crawling and jumping have been weaved in here too, as some cover and grass can be crawled under or within, short obstacles or walls may be jumped up or over, and you can even fire from prone. Most of the game you'll have an AI partner alongside you, though I found their presence to be inconsistently helpful as well. Sometimes they would sneak with me and take out enemies on their own, and sometimes I would be sneaking and they would start combat by opening fire when I didn't want to. The partners are still lopsidedly invincible and invisible to enemy AI. Only a few times did I ever have to rescue them once combat started, but like the first game, the enemy somehow ignores your ally even when they're standing in the open, even when the enemy literally steps on them, and even when they exchange gunfire, and yet somehow it still doesn't start combat from stealth. Again, they only care about specifically spotting you, sometimes exhibiting a strange rubber banding effect by gravitating specifically in your direction when there is no reason they would randomly check your area. One curious decision was to have the player and the allies have an immersion-breaking sense for encounters. If there is an enemy somewhere, even if you don't know it, they will have their weapon drawn, and if the enemy is clear, they will also say so out loud, which breaks all tension. That being said, there is frequent scripted spawning though, and as there are countless times you're jumped after opening a door or crossing a gap that you can do nothing about, there are many times when you enter an area and 4 guys simply spawn out of thin air. Once in combat, dodging is a new mechanic to counter melee attacks, and frankly, it offers generous invincibility frames, so one-on-one duels are made trivial once you learn the proper timing with each enemy, as it never changes. Fortunately, new enemies shake things up, as dogs mean you cannot sit still for long in some areas, new human brutes require you to have mastered the dodge ability, and new infected like the volatile shamblers must be handled carefully. I'm really pleased with how they took the forgettable stalker enemies in the first game and made them distinct and more prominent here, with their own approach to combat and the environment. There are also a few boss fights in the game as well, and for a few specifically, the setup and execution of these encounters are some of the game's finest moments. Like the last game, weapons may be upgraded, but the descriptors are less than helpful as they give percentages for their changes, but not their baseline values, so you never know how much of a concrete change you are investing in. Skills are now arranged in trees that are first unlocked by finding the appropriate skill manual, and then unlocking each node sequentially down a tree. What this now means is that if you see a node you do want, you must go through nodes you may not want in order to get there. Interestingly, I do want to highlight the robust amount of options a player has to truly customize an individual experience, with options directly impacting challenge to options for those visually impaired with blindness or colorblindness. Though the heavy scripting of the game makes this manageable, it's still quite fascinating and impressive to see how the game creatively uses audio and tactile feedback to allow even a blind person to enjoy. The effort made to include more gamers into experiencing a product is commendable, and I recommend anyone playing to visit these options to make the game as approachable or punishing as they want. A few final notes before we move to story. Playing at a moderate pace, clearing every room of foes, and scouring every room for every pickup, this game clocked in at a little over 30 hours for me. If I were to skip combat or throw in optional exploring, I would imagine shaving 5 hours off that time. Once you beat the game, there is New Game Plus, which lets you keep all of your equipment, upgrades, and recipes, though there really isn't any replayability, and there currently is no other single or multiplayer content. We are now approaching the story discussion and analysis, and spoilers will not be spared. Please click the above timestamp if you do not want my takeaways and opinions on the story. Again, this is my personal opinion, so it's not important to agree with it or not. If my takeaways make you that mad, well, that's a personal problem. So, first off, there were two things that stuck in my head while I was playing this story. To explain the first thing, I want to give a quick recap of another story you may have heard of called Hamlet. It was written by Shakespeare 400 years ago and is iconic of the revenge tragedy format. Basically, you have a guy named Hamlet, a guy of importance who is out for revenge because his dad was killed for selfish reasons. He's up against a foe mightier than himself, but he still wants to take justice into his own hands. On his long journey, he eventually comes at odds with a side character who blames Hamlet for basically being the reason their dad and family was killed too. During their mutual struggle for revenge, visions of the dead father haunt Hamlet. Hamlet goes a little crazy, bonds are broken, and their friends, lovers, and allies all die or disappear, whether intentionally or not. Hamlet ends up in a duel to the death, but finds catharsis before he falls, and a side character gets to claim the ending. Why did I bring that up? Because while I don't think it was intentional at all, I think Druckmann and Gross basically told a version of Hamlet here, or at the very least, followed the textbook blueprint for Shakespeare's revenge tragedy. I started noticing the parallels shortly into the second chapter, and saw I was right almost the entire way. The thing is, once I understood this was to be a revenge tragedy story, things honestly lined up pretty logically. Really, all the causality and misfortunes that happen along this plot, not a single one bothers me from a storytelling perspective. Now let's look at the two main characters, Ellie and Abby. Superficially, there are obvious parallels meant to be drawn between their two journeys and personalities, but let's dig deeper. While I was playing, the other thing I kept wondering was, who is the real protagonist of this story? Because all stories have one, and the main character is not always the protagonist. Those two roles mean different things, and it's a common mistake to use the term interchangeably. As a reminder, the literary definition of a main character is just whoever's point of view the audience is experiencing, and in this case, it's whoever we control during the story. Since we control Ellie and Abby during their respective chapters and learn the story from their perspectives, that means they are both main characters within this game. But who is the protagonist? By definition, the protagonist is whoever is driving the story forward while everyone else is being impacted by those actions. The protagonist is the one identifying the objective, actively pursuing it, making choices, and whose actions keep the plot moving. So who is that? If we believe the objective of the game was revenge for Joel's death, then most people might say Ellie, but while Ellie is actively pursuing revenge, she actually spends all of her time chasing information gained by her friends, and in her mind she never achieves her own goal. She spends 2 game days looking for Tommy, and then 2 game days looking for Abby. She's being impacted by the plot, but the choices she makes do not drive the plot forward. Also, Ellie's presence is almost entirely unknown to Abby until the end, so she isn't driving Abby forward at all, either. Part of the reason she's able to sneak around as easily as she does is because almost all the side plots and side characters do not know of or care about her decisions and actions, since she is not driving the plot. Some people might say Abby then. Well, her goal is obviously not revenge for Joel since she kills him, but rather her focus is about protecting others. The entire game she moves from trying to help Owen to helping Yara to helping Lev, which again has nothing to do with Ellie. By the way, despite the misdirection of the game, Abby is also not an antagonist to Ellie. The entire game she either doesn't know of or care who Ellie is. She never sends any people or obstacles to stop her, and the 3 times they actually meet, she doesn't seriously want to kill her and lets her go. Ellie may hate Abby, but Abby doesn't really hate Ellie, and doesn't try to get in Ellie's way even for her own agenda of protecting others, so it's not well supported to call Abby an antagonist. So who is the protagonist? Who is the person driving the plot forward? Who is the person pushing both Ellie and Abby forward? Well, the way I see it, it's Tommy. Since the beginning, Tommy was the one who told Marlene to seek Joel if she needed help, starting this whole journey. Tommy is the one Joel was seeking as a lead to the Fireflies. Tommy is the one who extended the olive branch to Joel to have a home to heal in. Tommy is the one Abby was seeking as a lead to Joel. Tommy is the one who exposed Joel's name to Abby. Tommy is also someone who was there during Joel's execution. Tommy is the one who delayed Ellie by convincing her to stay back. Tommy chose not to tell Ellie Abby's name even though he knew it. Tommy was the one who made the choice to pursue Abby's group first and take care of them before Ellie could. Tommy is the one Ellie, Dina, and Jesse are initially here to find in Seattle and follow the trail of. Tommy is the one who takes out part of Abby's group and puts himself on both the WLF and Abby's radar. Tommy is the one who determines they avenge Joel and prepares everyone to head back. Tommy is the person Abby thinks she is hunting and credits him for the loss of all of her friends. Abby doesn't even consider Ellie, she thought it was all Tommy. Both Ellie and Abby are in pursuit of Tommy for most of the game, while Tommy is the one pursuing and achieving revenge. Even after Abby and Ellie clash and then go their separate ways, it's Tommy that comes to Ellie and drives her to give up her lifestyle and continue pursuing revenge and gives her Abby's location. Tommy is a plot device, but he's also the one driving the events of this game and honestly pursuing the objective. Tommy is a true protagonist. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree with that, I just think it's interesting to think about. Say for most of the game you were playing as Tommy instead of Ellie, and how believable that is because your character is saying things and making moves everyone else is following, including Ellie. It really clarifies character motivations. Abby is neither a protagonist nor antagonist, she is just another main character and mistaken target for the real conflict and enemy Ellie has to face and defeat, her character flaw of rage. That's why we see her react worse the more she gave in to anger and gets better when she was able to let go of the burden in the end. Now I think some people probably want a simple good guy bad guy story, so for anyone trying to figure out who is to blame for all of this mess and tragedy, that's also simple. It's Riley. It's Riley's fault Ellie got bit to begin with and started this whole ball rolling, so if you want to be upset or mad at anyone, blame Riley. Now going back to the revenge tragedy premise, one key element is catharsis, which is when the main character is able to let go of some huge emotional burden. Again, if you examine the story, Abby is a misdirection for the player's grief and anger, when the actual enemy to be conquered is hatred and revenge. The fundamental key for each main character's catharsis, which is also this game's theme and the way they defeat the true enemy, is forgiveness. Abby is constantly achieving her goal and feeling relief for it. She's able to forgive herself once she gets her revenge, feeling her father avenged. She's able to forgive herself for helping the assumed Seraphite enemy and help some kids in need, evident by the kids' gratitude and her nightmare's ending. She's able to forgive Ellie even after all her friends were dead, and again after their duel, as evident of being able to let go and walk away. Now for Ellie, she is constantly suffering from her emotional burden the entire game, and the more she pursues her hatred, the worse she feels emotionally and physically. It takes her a long time to realize her enemy isn't Abby, it's the anger she carries inside. She is able to forgive at the very end with her duel with Abby, the moment she remembered that she promised Joel she was ready to forgive him after years of pent-up anger. By remembering to forgive Joel and let go of her anger at him, she was able to forgive Abby and was able to let go of her anger at her and move forward. Both main characters achieve catharsis. It's all about forgiveness. So what about the main story itself? Well, I think it's fine, just told poorly. The deliberate choice to tell the story out of order means the audience is not getting a naturally logical flow of events, and so a lot of confusion or incomplete information is being conveyed. The way it's presented, with killing Joel in the prologue, the misdirection is a deliberate mental setup, as it suggests Ellie is on a hero's journey with Abby as the villain right away, and then the game deconstructs that mistaken assumption with flashbacks and switching main characters. When you subvert expectations, you're gambling with your audience, siding with their emotions, and missing the thematic parallels that both sides are experiencing similar losses, just from different perspectives. Looking at the outside sentiment surrounding this game, I would say it succeeded in evoking anger at the same time as Ellie as intended, but I question if it succeeded in also delivering the player into conquering that anger at the same time as Ellie. Personally, I'm not thrilled to have the story told partially through flashbacks, but the overall themes are still communicated and consistent, so I can't really complain too much. Like I said, it's a classic revenge tragedy. You have people die in ironic ways, people that die in sudden ways, people that are broken and unresolved. It's exactly the tragedy it was meant to be. And you know what? You really don't see that too often these days, so I have to compliment their boldness. In their anger, Ellie and Abby both lost their homes and almost all their friends. Even the war between the WLF and the Seraphites resulted in their mutual destruction. As an audience member, you're not supposed to like it, but instead absorb the lessons it's trying to convey. In the first game, it was about dealing with loss and learning to love, which is easy to relate to and get behind. But now it's about forgiving and letting go of anger, which is a lot harder of a process to get through for some people. End spoilers here. Overall, the visuals and art design, animations, environment details, and accessibility options are of exceptional quality you will see in few other games. The acting, motion capture, and sound design quality, and story theming are also very good. However, the choppy narrative structure, the subpar AI, story pacing, and level design, and the passable stealth and combat result in mediocre experiences meant to ferry the player between highly polished cinematics and scripted story bits. In conclusion, the game reminds me of a gourmet ornamental dish, meant to be admired from a distance for its visual details, aroma, and presentation, and not meant to actually be eaten because it's actually quite average in taste and empty in its substance. As a technical piece, this game is impressive. As a revenge story, this narrative is passable. And as a piece of software worth your time and money, this game is not a high priority, but there is a lot that can be enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching this review, I hope it helped. And if you would like to hear story summaries of either Last of Us game, check out a series I also produce called Recapitation. Enjoy, and I'll see you on the next Battlefield.